The air hung heavy with anticipation. It was the time of the Passover, a sacred period for the Jewish people. The streets of Jerusalem whispered with anticipation. It was the year 33 AD, under Roman rule. Hopes were pinned on Jesus of Nazareth. He spoke with authority and compassion. His teachings resonated deeply. He performed extraordinary miracles. Whispers about him spread like wildfire. The stage was set for a confrontation. Religious leaders sought to silence him. Judas Iscariot agreed to betray him. The wheels of fate set in motion, leading to a night of betrayal and an execution that altered history. Jerusalem teemed with pilgrims who had journeyed from far and wide to celebrate the Passover, their hearts filled with the sacred memories of liberation and divine intervention. The streets overflowed with the sights, sounds, and smells of the festival, families reuniting, lambs being led to the temple for sacrifice, and the air thick with the aroma of unleavened bread and roasting meat. Yet beneath the surface of this joyous occasion, a palpable tension crackled, a foreboding sense of something momentous about to transpire. Amidst the Passover preparations, Jesus shared a final meal with his disciples, a somber gathering known as the Last Supper. It was during this poignant meal that Jesus instituted the sacrament of communion, breaking bread and sharing wine with his followers, symbolizing his impending sacrifice. He spoke of betrayal, of his imminent suffering, and of his ultimate triumph over death. His words hung heavy in the air, a stark contrast to the festive atmosphere outside, a foreshadowing of the tumultuous events that were about to unfold. The Passover festival, a time of remembrance and celebration, was about to witness an event so momentous, so earth-shattering, that it would forever be etched in the annals of history. The stage was set, the actors in place, ready to play their parts in a drama that would determine the fate of humanity. Jesus of Nazareth, born in a manger, raised as a carpenter's son, emerged as a beacon of hope, a teacher of profound wisdom, and a miracle worker. His message of love and forgiveness captivated the common people and challenged the religious elite. As the Passover feast drew to a close, a palpable tension filled the air. Jesus led his disciples to the Garden of Gethsemane. The night air was cool and still. Jesus withdrew to pray, his heart heavy with sorrow. Meanwhile, Judas led soldiers to betray him. Their footsteps echoed, breaking the night's peace. Their destination, the garden where Jesus prayed. The sound of approaching footsteps shattered the tranquility of the Garden of Gethsemane. Jesus rose to meet the crowd, his resolve unwavering. Judas, with a twisted smile, led the pack. He kissed Jesus, the prearranged signal for the soldiers. The kiss, a symbol of love, became a tool of betrayal. "Judas," Jesus said, "are you betraying the Son of Man with a kiss?" The words hung heavy in the night air. The soldiers moved in, their hands reaching for swords. The disciples reacted with fear and indignation. Peter drew his sword and struck the high priest's servant. "Put your sword away, Peter," Jesus commanded. "Those who live by the sword will die by the sword. Do you not think I could call on my Father for 12 legions of angels?" Jesus' words hung in the air, a stark reminder of his divine power, a power he chose not to wield in self-defense. He knew his mission, embraced his Father's will, even as it led him down a path of suffering and sacrifice. He gently touched the wounded servant, healing his ear, a silent rebuke to the violence that threatened to engulf them. The soldiers, momentarily stunned by Jesus' words and actions, hesitated, their eyes darting between their quarry and the armed contingent of Roman soldiers who stood behind them, a silent reminder of Roman authority. The chief priests and elders, their faces contorted with a mixture of fear and triumph, stepped forward, eager to assert their authority. "What more evidence do we need?" they shouted. "We have heard his blasphemies with our own ears. He claims to be the Son of God, the Messiah. Seize him!" Their words, fueled by fear and envy, broke the spell, and the soldiers, their hesitation overcome, moved in to arrest Jesus. They bound his hands with rough rope, a physical restraint that could not confine his spirit, his divine essence. Jesus, his demeanor calm and resolute, offered no resistance. He looked at his captors with an expression of infinite sadness and compassion, as if mourning not for himself, but for the darkness that had gripped their hearts. His silence spoke volumes, a testament to his unwavering commitment to his mission, a mission that would soon culminate in the ultimate sacrifice. As Jesus was led away, his hands bound, his disciples watched in stunned silence. The weight of betrayal, the suddenness of the arrest, and the realization that their master, their friend, was about to face his accusers, left them reeling, their hearts pounding in their chests. Peter, his initial bravado replaced by a cold, creeping fear, followed at a distance, his heart torn between loyalty and self-preservation. He had vowed to protect Jesus, to lay down his life for him if necessary, but now, faced with the reality of the situation, his resolve crumbled. He would deny ever knowing Jesus, a betrayal that would haunt him for the rest of his days. The other disciples, their fear overwhelming their loyalty, scattered into the night, melting into the shadows, their dreams of a triumphant Messiah shattered. They were fishermen, tax collectors, ordinary men who had been swept up in the extraordinary ministry of Jesus. Now faced with the very real threat of arrest and persecution, they abandoned their leader, their fear a testament to the human frailty that Jesus had come to redeem. As Jesus disappeared into the darkness, surrounded by his captors, the night seemed to grow colder, the silence heavier. The Garden of Gethsemane, once a place of peace and prayer, stood as a silent witness to the darkest hour in human history, the hour when hope seemed to flicker and die, extinguished by the forces of betrayal, fear, and hatred. The rough hands of the temple guards propelled Jesus through the darkened streets of Jerusalem, the flickering light of their torches casting eerie shadows that danced and contorted against the ancient stone walls. Their destination was not the spacious halls of the Sanhedrin, the Jewish high court, but the opulent residence of Annas, the former high priest. Annas eyed Jesus with a mixture of curiosity and disdain. "So you are the Nazarene," Annas said, his voice a low growl. "Tell me, what is this talk of a new kingdom?" Jesus replied, "My kingdom is not of this world." Annas dismissed Jesus with a wave of his hand. He posed no immediate threat to Roman authority. Caiaphas, the high priest, would handle the accusations. Jesus was led to the Sanhedrin. He stood before the elders, their faces illuminated by oil lamps. Caiaphas presided over the assembly. "Are you the Messiah, the Son of God? Reports of miracles, of claims of divinity? Tell us, are you the Messiah?" The question hung heavy in the air. To answer truthfully was to invite condemnation. Yet to deny his true nature was to betray his mission. Jesus saw a reflection of the human condition. He knew his words would fall on deaf ears. "You say that I am," Jesus replied. He knew his fate was sealed, yet he would not compromise his message. While Jesus faced his accusers in the cold chambers of the high priest's residence, Peter lingered in the courtyard, drawn by loyalty and fear. He followed at a distance, his cloak pulled tight against the night chill. He couldn't abandon his master, but fear whispered warnings. Peter joined a group by the fire, hoping to blend in. A servant girl said, "You are one of his disciples, aren't you?" Peter denied, "I don't know what you're talking about." As the words left his lips, a rooster crowed. Inside the hall, the interrogation continued, the air thick with tension, the flickering lamps casting long shadows on the faces of the assembled elders. Jesus' silence in the face of their accusations, his refusal to defend himself against their venomous accusations, infuriated Caiaphas. "Have you no answer?" Caiaphas demanded, his voice booming across the chamber. "Do you not realize that you stand accused of blasphemy? You claim to be the Son of God, the Messiah, yet you offer no proof, no defense." Jesus, his face etched with pain and weariness, knew that any further words would be futile. He had spoken the truth, had proclaimed his divinity, but their hearts were hardened, their minds closed to the possibility of his claims. He would not engage in their games of religious and political maneuvering, would not stoop to defend himself against their baseless accusations. His silence, his refusal to play their game, enraged the Sanhedrin. They spat insults, hurled accusations, their voices rising in a crescendo of rage and frustration. Yet Jesus remained unmoved, his silence a powerful indictment of their hypocrisy, their unwillingness to see the truth that stood before them. Finally, Caiaphas, his face contorted with a mixture of rage and triumph, rose to his feet. "What need do we have of further witnesses?" he thundered. "You have heard the blasphemy with your own ears. What is your verdict?" The elders, their faces grim, their minds made up long before the trial had even begun, responded with a unanimous cry, "Guilty! He deserves to die!" The early morning light cast a pale glow over the Roman fortress in Jerusalem. Pontius Pilate, the Roman procurator, rubbed the sleep from his eyes as he was informed of his early morning visitor. The Jewish elders presented their prisoner, Jesus of Nazareth, condemned for blasphemy. Pilate descended and took his seat on the raised platform. He surveyed the scene, the Jewish elders and the calm prisoner, Jesus. "What charges do you bring against this man?" Pilate asked. The elders outlined their case. They accused Jesus of inciting the people, forbidding the payment of taxes to Caesar, and claiming to be the king of the Jews. They presented their accusations with a mixture of bluster and deference. Pilate, listening with growing skepticism, noticed the prisoner's silence. Jesus seemed unfazed by the accusations, his gaze fixed on some distant point. Intrigued, Pilate gestured for the guards to bring Jesus closer. The Roman guards, their faces impassive, their movements practiced and efficient, roughly propelled Jesus towards the platform where Pilate sat. The crowd parted slightly to allow them passage, their murmurs dying down as Jesus stood before the Roman procurator. "So, you are the king of the Jews?" Pilate asked, his voice a mixture of amusement and curiosity. He had heard rumors of this Nazarene, of his teachings and his alleged miracles, but he had dismissed them as the ramblings of a harmless religious zealot. Jesus, his gaze steady, met Pilate's eyes. "My kingdom is not of this world," he replied, his voice soft yet firm, echoing with an authority that seemed to transcend the confines of the courtyard. "If my kingdom were of this world, my servants would have been fighting, that I might not be delivered over to the Jews. But my kingdom is not from the world." Pilate, intrigued by Jesus' words, leaned forward slightly. He had dealt with his share of revolutionaries and self-proclaimed messiahs during his tenure in Judea, men who sought to overthrow Roman rule by force. But this man, this Jesus, seemed different. There was no fire of rebellion in his eyes, no thirst for power or vengeance. "So you are a king?" Pilate pressed, intrigued by the paradox of Jesus' statement. "You say that I am a king," Jesus replied, his voice calm and measured. "For this purpose I was born, and for this purpose I have come into the world, to bear witness to the truth. Everyone who is of the truth listens to my voice." Pilate, accustomed to the slippery nature of words, the way they could be twisted to serve political expediency, found himself unexpectedly unsettled by Jesus' words. Truth, he mused, a slippery concept at best, often subject to interpretation, to the whims of those in power. "What is truth?" Pilate asked, his voice a mixture of cynicism and genuine curiosity. He did not wait for an answer, for he doubted that this Nazarene, this preacher of otherworldly truths, could offer any insight that would be of use in the harsh realities of Roman politics. Pilate rose from his seat and approached the Jewish elders who had been watching the exchange with a mixture of impatience and apprehension. He addressed them in a low voice, his tone conveying his disdain for their accusations, his words intended to end this charade. "I find no guilt in this man," Pilate declared, his gaze sweeping over the assembled elders, daring them to challenge his authority. "I see no reason to condemn him." The elders, their faces hardening with anger and frustration, erupted in protest. They had expected a swift confirmation of their verdict, a rubber stamp on their condemnation. Now, faced with the possibility of their quarry being released, their carefully constructed case unraveling before their eyes, they resorted to increasingly desperate pleas and thinly veiled threats. "He stirs up the people, teaching throughout all Judea, from Galilee even to this place," they insisted, their voices rising in agitation. They knew that Pilate, ever wary of unrest and rebellion, would be sensitive to any suggestion that Jesus might incite an uprising against Roman rule. Pilate, sensing an opportunity to extricate himself from this increasingly volatile situation, decided to invoke an ancient Passover custom, one that allowed the Roman authorities to release a prisoner chosen by the people. He presented the crowd with a choice: Jesus of Nazareth, the enigmatic preacher who claimed to be a king of a kingdom not of this world, or Barabbas, a notorious insurrectionist, a man known for his violence and his hatred of Roman rule. "Whom do you want me to release for you?" Pilate asked, his voice echoing across the courtyard. "Jesus Barabbas or Jesus who is called Christ?" The crowd, their passions inflamed by the venomous pronouncements of the religious leaders, their judgment clouded by fear and prejudice, erupted in a deafening roar. "Barabbas! Barabbas! Release Barabbas!" Pilate, his face etched with a mixture of disgust and resignation, knew that he had misjudged the situation. He had hoped that the people, presented with a choice between a harmless preacher and a violent criminal, would choose mercy over vengeance. But the crowd, whipped into a frenzy by the manipulative tactics of the religious leaders, had chosen to embrace the very forces of darkness that Jesus represented. Pilate, desperate to appease the crowd, made one last attempt to reason with the mob. He ordered Jesus to be flogged, hoping this display of Roman authority would satisfy the crowd. The Roman soldiers carried out their orders with practiced efficiency. Jesus bore the punishment with stoic silence. Pilate presented the bloodied prisoner to the crowd. "Behold the man!" Pilate declared. "I find no fault in him!" The crowd continued their relentless chant. "Crucify him! Crucify him!" Pilate realized he had lost control of the situation. He knew defying the crowd would risk his career. He washed his hands, a symbolic gesture to absolve responsibility. "I am innocent of this man's blood," Pilate declared. "It is your responsibility." The crowd had made their choice. Pontius Pilate found himself swept along by the currents of history. The Praetorium, the Roman governor's headquarters, echoed with the sounds of casual cruelty. Roman soldiers, hardened by years of battle and occupation duty, found a perverse amusement in tormenting the Jewish prisoner. They had seen countless rebels and criminals pass through their hands, but there was something different about this one. A quiet dignity that seemed to mock their attempts to break his spirit. Yet, they were Romans. And this man, this Jesus, was their plaything for the moment. Stripped of his own garments and draped in a tattered purple robe, a mockery of royal attire, Jesus sat hunched over, his body still bearing the marks of the recent flogging. A soldier, his face flushed with drunken amusement, approached him, a twisted crown of thorns clutched in his hand. The thorns, long and sharp, were designed to inflict pain, to draw blood, to humiliate. With a rough shove, the soldier forced Jesus' head back, his laughter echoing through the chamber as he pressed the thorny crown onto his brow. The thorns pierced Jesus' skin, drawing blood that trickled down his forehead, mingling with the sweat of his agony. The soldiers, their laughter growing louder, took turns striking him, spitting on him, mocking his silence, their cruelty a testament to the darkness that can fester in the human heart. Through it all, Jesus remained silent, his eyes closed, his face a mask of pain and sorrow. He bore their cruelty with a quiet dignity that seemed to infuriate his tormentors, their laughter a desperate attempt to drown out the nagging voice of conscience, to silence the unsettling feeling that they were the ones being judged. The soldiers, their appetite for amusement sated, grew bored with their sadistic game. They dragged Jesus to his feet, the purple robe trailing behind him, a mockery of royalty. One of them thrust a reed into his bound hands, a makeshift scepter, and they bowed before him, their laughter echoing through the chamber, their words dripping with sarcasm. "Hail, King of the Jews!" they shouted, their voices thick with mockery. They struck him again, their blows landing on his bruised and bloodied back, their laughter a testament to their callousness, their inability to comprehend the depth of his suffering, the weight of the burden he carried. Pilate, drawn by the commotion, emerged from his private chambers. He watched the scene before him with a mixture of disgust and weariness. He had hoped that the flogging would satisfy the crowd's bloodlust, that this charade of a trial could end without further violence. But the sight of Jesus, bloodied and humiliated, paraded before his own soldiers like a common criminal, filled him with a sense of unease that he couldn't shake off. He had washed his hands of the matter, declared himself innocent of this man's blood. Yet he couldn't escape the nagging feeling that he was complicit in this injustice, that his unwillingness to stand up to the mob, to risk his own position for the sake of what was right, had sealed this man's fate. Pilate, his face pale and drawn, ordered the soldiers to bring Jesus before the crowd that had gathered outside the praetorium. He hoped that the sight of the prisoner, bloodied and broken, would satisfy their lust for vengeance, that they would be content with the punishment already inflicted. Jesus, his body racked with pain, his head throbbing from the crown of thorns, stood silently before the mob. He looked out at the sea of faces, their features twisted with a mixture of hatred, fear, and morbid curiosity. He saw their humanity, their capacity for both love and cruelty, and his heart ached for them, even as they called for his blood. "Behold the man!" Pilate declared, his voice echoing across the courtyard, his words a desperate plea for reason, for compassion. "I find no fault in him," but the crowd, their passions inflamed by the pronouncements of the religious leaders, their judgment clouded by fear and prejudice, were in no mood for reason. They had been whipped into a frenzy, their bloodlust stoked by the promise of a scapegoat, someone to blame for their own failings, their own fears. "Crucify him!" they shouted, their voices a deafening roar, their words echoing through the streets of Jerusalem, a chilling testament to the power of mob rule, the ease with which justice can be subverted, how quickly compassion can turn to cruelty. Pilate, his shoulders slumping with defeat, realized the futility of further resistance. He knew that to defy the crowd would be to risk his own career, perhaps even his life. With a heavy heart, Pilate washed his hands in a basin of water, a symbolic gesture meant to absolve him of responsibility, but the water, stained with blood, offered no solace. "I am innocent of this man's blood," Pilate declared. "It is your responsibility." And so Jesus of Nazareth was condemned to die a criminal's death. His only crime was the unwavering proclamation of truth. The crowd, their bloodlust sated, began to disperse, their shouts of condemnation fading into the midday heat. They had witnessed a spectacle, a public execution, and they went about their business, their lives seemingly unchanged, unaware that they had just witnessed the most pivotal event in human history, the moment when love and justice hung suspended between heaven and earth, and darkness seemed to have triumphed. The weight of the cross, rough-hewn and heavy, pressed down on Jesus' lacerated shoulders. Each step along the dusty road to Golgotha, the place of the skull, sent shards of pain shooting through his body. The Roman soldiers, their faces impassive, urged him forward with kicks and curses, eager to be done with this grim task. The crowd that followed, a mix of the curious and the cruel, pressed in close, their shouts and jeers mingling with the mournful cries of the women who had followed Jesus from Galilee. Their hearts ached with a sorrow too deep for words as they witnessed his suffering, their tears a testament to the love and compassion that even this brutal spectacle could not extinguish. Jesus, his strength failing, stumbled under the weight of the cross. Simon of Cyrene, a man from North Africa, was seized from the crowd by the Roman soldiers and forced to carry the cross behind Jesus. He had come to Jerusalem for the Passover festival, a pilgrim seeking spiritual renewal, and now he found himself caught up in this drama, this spectacle of suffering. As they approached Golgotha, a barren hill outside the city walls, a place of execution reserved for the lowest of criminals, the air grew heavy with a sense of foreboding, a palpable darkness that seemed to descend from the heavens themselves. On Golgotha, the Roman soldiers wasted no time in carrying out their grim task. They stripped Jesus of his garments, exposing his bruised and bloodied body to the gaze of the crowd, their lack of compassion a chilling reminder of the depths of human cruelty. They offered him a drink of sour wine mixed with gall, a concoction meant to dull the pain of crucifixion, but Jesus, his eyes fixed on some distant horizon, refused the drink. They forced him down onto the cross, his body a raw canvas of pain. One of the soldiers, his face a mask of indifference, produced a handful of heavy iron nails. With practiced precision, he positioned a nail against Jesus' wrist, the point glinting in the harsh sunlight. The sound of the hammer blows, each one a hammer blow to the hearts of those who loved him, echoed across the barren landscape. Jesus, his body contorting in agony, his breath catching in his throat, cried out, a primal scream of pain that ripped through the silence. But even in his agony, his thoughts were for others, not for himself. "Father, forgive them," he whispered, his voice hoarse with pain. for they know not what they do." The soldiers, their faces impassive, continued their work, their movements mechanical, devoid of malice but also of mercy. They nailed his other hand to the cross, then his feet, the sound of each hammer blow a sickening thud that seemed to reverberate through the very bones of the earth. The cross, with Jesus nailed to it, was hoisted into the air with a sickening thud, the wood groaning under his weight. It was then dropped into a pre-dug hole, the impact sending a fresh wave of agony through his body. The crowd, their initial bloodlust sated, watched in stunned silence as Jesus hung between heaven and earth, his lifeblood draining away, a spectacle of suffering that defied comprehension. Above his head, the Roman soldiers nailed a sign, the white wood stark against the darkening sky. It was written in Aramaic, Latin and Greek, a proclamation for all to see: Jesus of Nazareth, King of the Jews. Pilate, in a final act of defiance against the religious leaders who had orchestrated this execution, had refused to alter the inscription. Let them see, he thought, let them see the consequences of their actions, the true nature of their king. 2 other crosses were erected on either side of Jesus, each bearing a condemned man, their crimes lost to history. They were thieves, highwaymen, their lives a testament to the brokenness of the world, the pervasiveness of sin. One of them, his face twisted in agony, his voice hoarse with pain, hurled insults at Jesus. "Are you not the Christ?" he sneered. "Save yourself and us!" The other thief, his breathing shallow, his body racked with pain, rebuked his companion. "Do you not fear God?" he whispered, his voice barely audible above the murmurs of the crowd, "since you are under the same sentence of condemnation? And we indeed justly, for we are receiving the due reward of our deeds. But this man has done nothing wrong." He turned his head towards Jesus, his eyes pleading for a recognition that seemed unlikely in this crucible of suffering. "Jesus," he whispered, his voice thick with a lifetime of regret, "remember me when you come into your kingdom. Jesus." His head slumped forward, his breath coming in ragged gasps, summoned the last reserves of his strength. He turned his head slightly, his gaze meeting the thief's eyes, and in that brief moment of connection, something profound transpired. A lifetime of sin, of rebellion, of hardness of heart, seemed to melt away in the face of such unexpected compassion. "Truly, I say to you," Jesus replied, his voice a whisper that seemed to carry across the centuries, "today you will be with me in paradise." The sun hid its face. Darkness descended over the land, a palpable darkness. Jesus, in immense pain, cried out, "Eli, Eli, lema sabachthani." My God, why have you forsaken me?" A Roman centurion witnessing this whispered, "Truly, this man was the Son of God." Jesus whispered, "It is finished," and breathed his last. As twilight descended upon Jerusalem, casting long shadows over the city, a procession made its way through the cobblestone streets. At its heart, men carried the lifeless form of Jesus of Nazareth, his body bearing the marks of crucifixion. Their faces reflected deep grief. Leading was Joseph of Arimathea, who had found the courage to act. A secret admirer of Jesus, Joseph requested permission to claim the body. Pilate granted his request. Accompanying Joseph was Nicodemus, fearful of repercussions. He carried myrrh and aloes, fragrant burial spices. Together, these 2 mourners, their hearts united in grief, carried Jesus' body to a tomb. It was a place of peace, a stark contrast to the bustling city. With heavy hearts, Joseph and Nicodemus prepared Jesus' body for burial. They washed away the blood and dust, their touch gentle. They wrapped his body in linen, binding his wounds with care. The tomb was heavy with the scent of burial spices. They laid Jesus' body in the tomb, his head on a reed pillow. They rolled a massive stone across the entrance, sealing the tomb. Roman guards stood watch outside the tomb, their presence, a testament to Roman authority. Fear lingered in the air. Darkness enveloped Jerusalem, a strange silence descended. The streets, once filled with noise, were now eerily quiet. Religious leaders retreated to their homes. Jesus' disciples huddled in fear and uncertainty. Saturday dawned bright and clear. It was a day of rest and reflection. The silence of that Saturday stretched out like an eternity. The tomb, sealed and guarded, stood as a stark reminder of death. But within that silence, something extraordinary was stirring.